Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It's time for the match preview with me, Andrew Musgrove, and John Gibson. Newcastle travel down to Bournemouth on Sunday afternoon for their second game of the Premier League season on the back of a 1-0 victory over Southampton. A well-earned and hard-fought victory, but 3 points is all that matters. John, have you quite gotten past Saturday's kickoff yet?
It was quite a game, wasn't it? I was prior to the game, and we bumped into each other and talked in town before the game. Prior to the game, I was thinking we'll cruise nicely to a 3-0 victory and everything will be straight bat and pad, etc., etc. But football has a wonderful means of turning everything on its head. And when you're down to 10 men after half an hour, it's a different ball game. So I was delighted under the circumstances. The 3 points is all that mattered. And I was delighted to get it. And it was a wonderful show of character. It wasn't particularly a great show of Newcastle at the very best with the high press and the high energy. And it wasn't like that at all, but it was a show of character. And at the end of the day, the 3 points are 3 points. Ask somebody like Spurs who go to Leicester and get 1 point.
And when you have to fight as hard as they did, backs against the wall, do you go into this week and into Sunday's game against Bournemouth thinking, look what we can do when we've got 10 men, when we have to really put everything in? Imagine what we could do with a full set of players on the pitch.
Yes, I think that absolutely comes into it. You take a lot of confidence out of that result, those 3 points against all the odds. Because playing in it doesn't matter who the opposition is, never mind another Premier League club. To play an hour with 10 men and the score level at the time, they weren't in a situation to hold on to a lead. They hadn't got the lead. That takes some doing. But you know what? Apart from the confidence it gives me, Andrew, and it should give them, what pleases me and what I'll be looking for, I is the fact that there'll be more being put into the tank of people like Bruno and Gordon who came back late from international duty, and I think it off showed on Saturday because I thought Gordon and Bruno were well off their high standards. So was Isaac, without the excuse of coming back late. But those two boys were, and Bruno talked about it afterwards, were well off what they can do. We'll have got another week into their tank, and hopefully that will show with better performances. Our blue chip player that got us through was Joe Linton, and the other three were nowhere near what they can be. And it's interesting because I was thinking after the game, Andrew, in the old days it was very straightforward and simple. Everybody had the same summer off in the days of the entertainers or before that with Supermac. Every every club had the same time off, came back at the same level of fitness or lack of it, but they didn't come back in stages like this. And it does take it out of a lot of players. I think we showed that. Manchester City, because they've got such a deep squad, came back and left their three England players, Foden, Stones, and Walker, out their starting 11 because they obviously thought they hadn't enough in the tank. And I know the argument that goes opposite to that, and that is always another side of the coin, is that Saka, who also played in the Euros, was absolutely sensational for Arsenal. Made one, scored one, they won 2-0, and the manager was talking about him in the same breath as Messi. So that it is different for other people. But our two boys looked well short on Saturday. And this extra week with no game in the middle and being able to get some petrol in the tank should significantly make a change for Bournemouth this weekend.
Yeah, fingers crossed. And I think a lot of players will go into that game with a lot of confidence as well, feeling maybe a lot better than they would have done. Players like Sean Longstaff, who I thought was excellent against Southampton. Obviously, that tackle he got in on Diaz got a big cheer, but I thought his overall performance was really, really good in the face of what has been some strong criticism towards the end of last season and this summer, John. I think players like him Obviously, Tino got the nod. He maybe didn't do as well as we'd all hoped, but he's still putting a decent shift. Lewis Hall, I think it was just a good game to maybe really it put the players through their paces, but also left them feeling hopefully with a bit of a bounce in their step after a hard-fought victory.
Yeah, I thought Longstaff was absolutely excellent. Byrne was, but it was Byrne. It was Dan's type of game, wasn't it? I mean, backs to the wall, up against it. Dig in. I mean, that is right down Dan's street. 8'6", head everything away, morale, battering on about what we've got to do right down their street. He was good. Longstaff was good. They got overshadowed by Joe Linton being awesome. Of course, they got overshadowed, but the Pope was excellent. There was good performances. I mean, Hall, I was absolutely delighted for the one he got off the line because that was a 2-point saver without a shadow of doubt. Having said that, uh, I surprisingly found all the negative things about him came out in that match. People ran off the back of him time and time again. He was grand going forward, but the attackers were running off the back of him at will almost. And that was a trifle worrying, but that's something that Eddie will be looking at and saying, can we? Because Eddie has talked about that being the side of his game where he had to improve. Does he leave him in and get him to improve again just by getting games, or is he tempted to throw Kelly in at left back against his former club? Because Kelly's not going to get in on the left side of centre half at Bournemouth because Burns more than done enough to make certain he plays down there.
I mean, we'll talk about that defence now because that's going to be the key question: is who replaces Fabian Scar at right-sided centre back? It's most probably going to be Emil Kraft.
Oh, I think it's almost automatically going to be Emil Kraft. You certainly wouldn't move Burn across, and he wouldn't want to be because he is essentially left-sided. Could Kelly play in there? There's the possibility, but he's not his comfort side. That's why he's a left-sided centre half and a left back. There isn't anybody Barcraft in signings, which we might touch on later on. But it doesn't look as if anybody's going to come in time for the Bournemouth game. The way we're looking at it, it would have to be heck of a quick turnaround because they wouldn't have time to train with the boys. If anybody did come in before Sunday, you would expect them to be on the bench, and it's really a question mark about somebody coming in. Although if they are, it's got to be pretty quick because next week it's all over. We either have people or we don't. So I think Kraft is going to start there. We defended magnificently against Southampton for an hour with 10 men. Overall, defended magnificently. It wasn't just the back four and the goalkeeper. I mean, Longstaff and put in shift, etc., etc., etc. We kept a clean sheet, which is a rarity for us last season, not the season before. Would Eddie being cautious on or stroke loyal on these sort of things? Would he make two changes in his back four? Because he's making one in terms of Kraft playing for Shaw. I'm talking about Hall, or would he leave it be, or does he think this is a perfect match for Kelly going back from whence he came? And of course, as you've mentioned in the past, Andrew, a lot of Bournemouth people saw Kelly as a left back.
And I suppose
So
I was going to say the other question is Tino Livramento done enough to hold his spot at right back as well?
yes, I think he has. I mean, you're absolutely right. It wasn't one of his better games, but if you start ditching somebody on that, then you would be making 4 or 5 changes every game. I mean, if you ditch Livramento for that, you could ditch Isaac, Gordon, and Bruno for their performances, and that you wouldn't dream of that, would you?
But do you think picking Tino Livramento to start in the first game against Southampton, was that a sign to him being the first choice right back, or was that a sign that Kieran Trippier wasn't fit after the Euros? Because we've talked about it there. Certain players at certain teams have sat out the first game because of their summer campaign. What does it mean for Newcastle United?
I think it means Livramento is the right back, all things being equal, because Yes, I just made the point earlier if players coming back from the Euros not being up to scratch, but that wasn't why Trippier was out. Trippier was out, bless him, because he's 34 in September. He has not looked, despite his Euros call up and how well he did out there, he has not looked the player that first joined us. Slightly beneath that, not much, but significantly so. And I think he was left out because while he will not be pushed out of the door either by Eddie Howe or by the Newcastle United hierarchy, eh, we would sell him on the right offer, and he would probably go on the right offer. So there's a possibility that he wasn't going to make the end of this month. And that came into it as well as having Livermore there ready to go in. No, I think that team selection, and by the way, here's a surprise for me. It was exactly the team I mentioned, 11, on last week's podcast that he actually picked. There's a rarity because he normally brings one out the back of the hand somewhere along the line. No, I think that was a significant pointer to the future of Trippier and Livramento at Newcastle United.
Yeah, no, I agree. Obviously, Kieran Trippier was playing in the academy derby against Sunderland
Yeah,
earlier this week alongside Matty Target. So, be interesting to see if that was to get his fitness up, or if that indeed was, kind of a chance and a chance to put himself in the shop window if any Premier League scouts were there watching. It's really interesting though on the centre back choice. Like you say, it's going to have to be Emil Kraft because there are no other options. And Eddie Howe, as expected, talked up Emil Kraft, who did a very good job coming onto the pitch and replacing Jacob Murphy to replace Fabian Scar. He's a good player, John, a good squad player. But if the window ended and Newcastle United's centre-back options heading into January were Fabian Scar, Emil Kraft, Lloyd Kelly, Dan Burn, with Lascelles and Botman coming back maybe November time at the earliest, is that a bit of a gamble?
it's a huge gamble, not a bit of a gamble, because it's not good enough. And how often do we say this? If you're looking for the Champions League, which we are, if you're looking certainly for Europe, which we are, and let's get this right, Andrew, it's going to be tough finishing in the top six when you look at who's there. I mean, one slip and you finish seventh. So it's going to be tough to make certain we're finishing the top six, never mind the top four. And if you look at that, as good a players as they are, Kraft's not good enough to be right side centre half, and I know Shaw would come back in 3 matches' time, but he's not good enough to start. Shaw were vulnerable with cover and with injuries with him. Byrne is the frying pan job, but not necessarily the cultured centre half of a top four side. Would Manchester City or Arsenal buy Big Dan Burn? Certainly not. He is a stepping stone along the way to where you want to get to. He is not the finished article. And so we are well short. And I'm sick of saying we're gambling because you know what? We end up gambling, Andrew. If you look at the last transfer windows, they've been peculiar. There's been situations we haven't addressed, like centre forward, like right side centre half, while we've kept bringing in fullbacks and 5 goalkeepers and 2 outside lefts and Gordon and Barnes. In other positions, we just don't address them. So I am desperate between now and Friday of next week that we address the centre half position and, yes, the outside right position as well. Because again, Almiron and Murphy are decent players, but they're not top four players.
At the time of recording, so we're recording this on the Wednesday morning, this will go out on the Thursday morning. Fulham have had a bid accepted for Joachim Andersen of Crystal Palace. Now, Crystal Palace's first choice centre backs are Andersen and Marc Guehi, who, of course, Newcastle United are on the table for. Now, according to various reports, the deal for Andersen doesn't affect the deal for Guehi. In Newcastle's opinion, they still think they can get a deal done. Steve Parish, though, spoke last week about he doesn't think they would sell both their centre backs, and you can't see that, especially with just over a week of the window remaining. It just would make no sense for any team to do that. So, in my opinion, Newcastle can hope they can get a deal done, but I actually think if a deal was to be done, John, it would have to be for even more money than the 65, 70 million that they're talking about, just simply because of the time left. And I think Palace are now in a position where they can demand even more money than they already are doing. Do you think that deal
Yeah,
for Guehi is off the table now? Do you think that's it? They need to move on?
well, that is a brilliant question because, Newcastle, how often have we used the phrase over the last fortnight? And I suspect about 3 times a day that Newcastle still think they can get a deal done for Gay. Well, if that's the case, why haven't they done it by now? It's all right keep saying we'll get a deal done, but you've got to actually take that final step and get it done. Newcastle are at the situation now where they're at risk. They're at risk of Palace saying we don't have to sell Gay, we've sold Anderson, and they don't have to sell anybody for financial fair play. By the way, I've been told this by my contact at Palace because, of course, they've sold Elise. So yes, they need money for the stadium, etc., etc., but they're not under any pressure where they're going to be docked points or anything's going to happen because they've sold Elise. And if they sell Anderson, are they going to sell Gay as well? Or did they make a statement last weekend by making Gay captain to say, look, we see you as captain and here's a big dollop of rise that you can have in your pay if you stay with us. I mean, Newcastle have got to either bite the bullet and give them the 65 mil down plus the add-ons, which evidently is what they want. We have been totting it up towards 65 million, but with all add-ons, they want that down as a basic fee. Um, do we do that or do we walk away? I tell you what, we've got to decide today, if not yesterday, Andrew, because time is against us. Maybe they have decided and they're going down a different route, but they've got to decide quick. The stock choice is, do we spend 70 million on Gay or do we split that 70 million and buy a 40 million pound centre half and a 30 million pound right winger? My answer to that immediately is that if you are going to split your money to get two players instead of one, you've got to make certain that it's an upgrade on what you've got. It's no good just buying a centre half because we want a centre half. The 40 million pound centre half, is he only half as good as Gay on the finances? I mean, is he only, in which case do we want him? And the 30 million pound, we've got to make certain that he's better than Almiron and Murphy. And because we're not filling holes here, we're looking for upgrades, and that is what's important. But you know what's more important than anything, mate? That we sign somebody before the deadline, because the fans are going to get deflated. They, but apart from the fans getting deflated, and you and I are in that group as well as being privileged to be asked, we would be deflated. Apart from that, you can't tell me that the squad won't be deflated if it's not, you know, built a little bit higher, or that Eddie Howe's not going to be deflated if he's given nobody else. He'll come out with his usual in front of the cameras, but I'm talking about away from the cameras. We need to get somebody in. And we've been talking for far too long saying, Newcastle feel they can get a deal over the line. Why do they feel that if they don't go and get it? And by the way, if you did it today and tomorrow and suddenly you're going down to Bournemouth and now it's happened, you've got about 4 days to get two players in. It really is decision time. If it's not beyond decision time, you either put the money down and get Gay, or you say forget him and you get a 40 million pound centre half and a 30 million pound winger. But either way, you've got to get on with it. You've got to get a little wiggle on because there ain't much time.
And maybe by the time you guys listen to this or watch this on Thursday morning, a decision either way has been made. Maybe Newcastle United have moved on to other targets. If they do move on to other targets, John, Joe Gomez is probably the one that I think they will go after. And for me personally, that doesn't do it for me. I don't think he's an upgrade on what they've got already. He's an extra body. I don't think he's any worse than Fabian Scar or Dan Burn, but I don't think he's an instant upgrade to the starting 11 like Marc Guehi would be. That being said, as both of us always say, you've got to trust that the recruitment team at Newcastle United know what they're doing. They've got very little, if anything, wrong on their previous incomings. So you've got to trust that if it is Gomez they turn to, it's him for very good reasons.
You've got to, yes, you've got to trust them because in the main they have got it right in the transfer market. If there was any criticism, it's sometimes that they haven't prioritised positions we think they should have prioritised in signing, say, a couple of fullbacks when we needed a centre half, not signing a centre forward last season, etc., and us getting caught short and playing false nines because Callum Wilson wasn't available and Isaac wasn't. Um, but they haven't made mistakes. So you've got to say to them, right, we bow to your superior knowledge. But like you, I don't see Gomez as an improvement. I said earlier in this podcast, we haven't got to just fill holes, we've got to get an upgrade. I don't think Gomez is an upgrade. I think he's exactly the same. He's not worse. And it might be that Eddie Howe, who we have great faith in, and the club talent spotters have faith in, that he can wave a magic wand, like with the new centre forward we've got, the boy, and like Kelly, and you'll get twice a player that you actually bought, and that has worked as well as getting it right in the transfer market. Howe and his team have got players up to the optimum very easily. But Gomez would worry me. And that was one of the reasons I said to you at the start of this podcast that we haven't got to fill in holes. We've got to get upgrades, because my worry is that if we don't get Guehi, we will go for two players, and we'll be able to say, look, we've got two players instead of one. We've got your winger and a centre half instead of just a centre half. But if they're both pot fillers, then that isn't good enough. And I'm not suggesting there will be. Newcastle might go out and get absolute quality in both positions, and that's wonderful. And by Jove, do I want that to happen. But we don't just want pot fillers, we need upgrades. And is Gomez an upgrade? Only time would tell. But I feel more sure, forgetting the price ranges, Andrew, I feel more certain about the talent of Gay than I do about the talent of Gomez.
Yeah, one to wait and see. The other man, John, looking at the start 11 for Bournemouth, Jacob Murphy will undoubtedly come back on to the right flank. Of course, he was the man sacrificed for Emil Kraft after Fabian Scar's red card. He joked that he had a wonderful little cameo, but he'll be raring to go after such a great pre-season. He would have been gutted to have been the one who had to go off, and he'll be looking forward to starting against Bournemouth on Sunday. I said Saturday there, didn't I, on Sunday, and carrying on that good form of his pre-season.
Yes, I mean, you poor lad, you can't. He got 20, 25 minutes and then had to be hauled off, and he thoroughly understood why he was hauled off, and there was no tantrum or anything like that. Neither would there be. But you're not then going to lose your players to Almiron. Almiron didn't even get on at any stage in the second half. So, I mean, Murphy's nailed on to be outside right down there, and so he should be. So, you're going to get Kraft for sure. I think he'll probably stay with Hall, but I would give serious consideration to Kelly. Um, and outside of that, I don't see there being a change, any further
Yeah.
changes.
No, I agree. I think he'll stick with the team that he started with on Saturday gone, obviously minus Fabian Scar. And we look forward then to the opponents on Sunday, John. Bournemouth, they drew 1-1 with Nottingham Forest on the opening day of the Premier League season. They needed a late equaliser, 86 minutes on the clock from Antoine Semenyo, he's a very exciting player. He was playing as the central striker for that game, but they have gone out and splashed £40 million on Brazilian international Evenson from Porto, 60 goals and 140 appearances. He was part of the squad for the Copa America just last month. He looks a handful, John, and whoever does come in at centre-back is likely to be the man to try and stop him. It's going to be an interesting battle if indeed he does start.
Yeah, it is. It is. And we shouldn't be caught short on what he's like, because Eddie Howe just needs to talk to Bruno, who's played with him for Brazil, and to know exactly which foot he favours, what he does well, what he doesn't like doing, what's his comfort zone, what isn't his comfort zone. Um, and let's be brutally truthful. They spent 40 million on him, but they're still 25 million in pocket because they got 65 million for Solanke. So they haven't got an upgrade on their centre forward to replace them. But Bournemouth on Newcastle United, and that's a totally different thing. You've got to be careful with Brazilian centre forwards, and I say that having gone through Joe Linton being a Brazilian centre forward for Newcastle. But you've got to be careful with the guy. He'll do a job. Ironic, isn't it, Solanke? And instead of him playing against Newcastle on Sunday, he plays against Newcastle on Sunday with Spurs, of course, which is quite different. It's a heck of a reunion day down there, isn't it? When we're going down to Bournemouth, there's Howe, Tyndall, and Graham Jones on the bench for us, plotting the downfall of Bournemouth, all of whom were employed by Bournemouth. There's Kelly, who we've just signed from Bournemouth. There's Wilson, who we got from Bournemouth, who's sitting out a game against them yet again because of injury. There's Fraser that we got from Bournemouth that we still haven't been able to unload as yet with time running out. And there's Rich Hughes just left us, who was from Bournemouth. So there's 7 people on the Newcastle payroll, if you like, this year, all of whom are Bournemouth inclined. And by the way, Eddie Howe signed Solanke for Bournemouth and would have taken him back in a whisper this summer, but we couldn't afford 65 on a centre forward because we needed other positions filled in. But it's amazing the sort of situation we have with Bournemouth these days. They're a difficult side. The result at the weekend wasn't great to get a late equaliser against Forest and need that. And their manager to admit that they were sort of left at a dawn sight late, and it was a bit lucky because of that. Um, Forest aren't a great side. They battle at home, but they're not a good side. But Bournemouth finished the season with an absolute flourish and will be difficult for us. But again, I go back to what I always say. If your ambition is as high as ours and you're going to justify it, you don't go to Bournemouth and lose.
You don't, but they did last season, and I'm going to get onto the away form of Newcastle from
Aye, that's
last
why,
season.
that's why we didn't make Europe. That's why we didn't make Europe, because we went to
Mm.
places last season like Bournemouth and lost.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll talk about that in a moment. I just still want to talk about just briefly some of the players on this Bournemouth side because they've got some very decent players. Alex Scott, very impressive. They've got a 19-year-old centre back who apparently was fantastic against Forest. He's getting lots of players. Clivett is another one who catches the eye. But lots of criticism, John, for Neto, who's their captain, their goalkeeper. He was at fault for the Forest goal. He parried the ball into the feet of Chris Wood, who popped the ball into the back of the net. There's a man who's suddenly found his goal-scoring form as Chris Wood. We'll not talk about that, though, John. But yeah, Neto,
We'll
it's
talk
interesting.
about that next week.
I don't want to talk about that because if he starts against... No, let's not. It was interesting because Southampton... the guy I spoke to cover Southampton said, Alex McCarthy in goal, he's the weak link. He doesn't like the ball at his feet. And what happened? He gave the ball straight to Isak. Isak sets Joe Linton up. And it seems like Neto may be on the same path for Bournemouth, where he's a bit of the weak link. So if Newcastle United can rattle him, can put the high press on him, it looks like that's where they can exploit Bournemouth.
Yeah, and it gets more and more that way, doesn't it? Because playing out from the back can look attractive. It means you keep the ball. It's totally a new thing, as is, by the way, kicking off the football game and putting it 45 yards back to your goalkeeper or your centre half when they used to kick it up the field the way we were actually attacking. Why all teams now kick off and push the ball back 45 yards to their centre half and try to build from there? I'm not sure. But also playing out from the back, it's attractive if you do it well in the way that Manchester City and Liverpool, who were the first two to really do it properly, because they had they have got goalkeepers who you think could play midfield. They've got great feet, and all the other sides seem to suddenly think that's the way to go. And we were warned before Southampton that they over iced the cake at the back, and look what the goalkeeper did with Isaac, as you say. That's why we won the game. That's why they lost the game. And yes, you put pressure on this guy because it also gets the crowd up and going, doesn't it? The home crowd will panic if they start playing it around the back and we are nipping in with a high press and about ooh. But of course, if the manager's telling them to do that, they'll continue to do it. So yes, we've got to be alert to that and put the high press on them, because that's why we got. If you boil it down in its simplest form, that's how we got 3 points on Saturday. So let's see if we can get 3 points that way again.
And maybe a psychological thing as well, because what Neto really would have wanted would have been a good start of the season. In the last season, he had those mistakes in his game. He'll not be naive to the outside noise about it. So having that first game, a mistake which costs your side a goal, that will not be doing a good thing for his confidence heading into the next game against Newcastle. So hopefully he's feeling a little bit nervous and Newcastle United can get the best of him and Bournemouth. Now, we mentioned there last season, John, down at the Vitality, Newcastle lost 2-0. Solanke got both goals. It was just after the Dortmund trip, and Newcastle United were ravaged by injuries and I think suspensions as well. Lewis Miley had to come into the squad, and he was absolutely brilliant that day. The rest of the Newcastle United team, not so much. And like we say, they lost. I guess in many ways, if you look back and you're trying to kind of pick out what we learned from it, the first thing, and probably the fairest thing you have to say, is the team was decimated by injuries. So this is going to be a totally different team. It's a fit squad, other than Tonali not being available and Cher not being available. They've pretty much got probably the starting 11 to pick from. Callum Wilson, obviously, he'll not be there. He'll be missing for a couple of weeks, you would think. But, the starting 11 that does start on Sunday is probably their strongest. So you'd expect a totally different game.
Absolutely, and if you looked against Southampton, when I went in the press box before the game, I mean, Target was unexpected. We say that Eddie always produces something totally unexpected, and Target was it really, because there was nothing unexpected in the team. But Target on the bench, I mean, it was nowhere near being fit, and we knew he wouldn't be called on. But if you looked at name for name of that bench with Dubravka, the cover goalkeeper, that's the strongest bench. Wilson wasn't available to be on it, but that's as strong a bench as we've had in a heck of a long time. No question about that. And outside of, if I mean, we can feel that bench again outside of, say, Kraft, who's got to play actually in the starting team. So we've got to get somebody on the bench for him. But not only is the team strong, but the bench is strong, and that has. I mean, sometime last season we had two goalkeepers on the bench and then a load of kids. So it is totally different, and this is a totally different match to what we had down there. And that was one of our poorest displays at Bournemouth last season. I don't think this match this weekend is anything like that match was, or in any way similar, apart from the venue in the opposition. And I would expect it to be very, very different.
I mean, just to go through what happened that day down in Bournemouth, you were missing Bruno through suspension. Callum Wilson was injured. Miguel Almiron was forced off with injury. You were missing Alexander Isak. You were missing, I think Fabian Scar Fabian Scar and Longstaff needed treatment. They were absolutely ruined by injuries. Hence the reason Sean Longstaff came in, Lewis Miley came into the fold. So it is going to be a totally different setup, a totally different team, more energy. And as you say, there are the options off the bench as well to change the game. I mean, hopefully they don't need to change the game with an hour gone, but to be able to bring off the bench the likes of Almiron, Harvey Barnes, William Asula as well, they've got depth now. Okay, obviously you'd like a bit more, but they've got much more depth, as you've mentioned there, than they did at times last season. But the other thing that might worry Newcastle fans, John, is the away form, because it was awful last season. It was dreadful. They lost 11 out of 19 games on the road. Just not good enough at all. Do you think it'll be better this year around?
It's got to be better this year round. There's no ifs or buts about it. And we had a very good away record the season before last. But last season, the reason we finished seventh was because our away form was absolutely shocking, and it's got to be much better. You mentioned in that little preamble there about energy, and that is something that worries me a little bit, because when I look back on the match against Southampton, I thought we lacked energy. That wasn't, in one of the reasons being that people like Bruno and Gordon weren't quite what they are when they got 100% in the tank, and Isaac up front alone almost not went through the motions, but was chasing a paper bag round a park in a high wind. Um, so we weren't the high energy side that we are. And even when we started, Andrew, and it was 11v11, we didn't. I was surprised, because it's the opening game of the season. We've got a strong side out. We've got a strong bench. I'm looking at us going at them and setting a standard and putting them on the back foot. It wasn't a high energy performance, and we are at our best when we play high energy, high press football. We've got to get back to that at Bournemouth, because we didn't show it against Southampton. There's a reason why we didn't show it in the final hour, because we weren't 10 against 11. They made the extra man count, but we weren't showing it in the first half hour. We've got to get back to the high energy game.
And if they do that, they'll get 3 points. And I actually really do think getting 3 points against Bournemouth is absolutely crucial, just to get the right mindset when you are away from home. Because the last thing you want, a bit like the Neto situation that I mentioned just previously, you don't want to have a bad game. You don't want to lose that game when it was so bad last season. So you want to make sure that your away campaign starts on a high note, and hopefully 3 points. It won't be easy, a tricky side, John, but how are you predicting it's going to go?
Well, for the very reasons you said, this is as much a must win, if you like, as Southampton was. That was to get us off on the right foot, which we did result wise. This is to banish the thoughts that every time we're on the road, you're staring at a possible defeat. 11 out of 19 last season was absolutely frightening. We've got to get rid of that. And again, like I said, you're not going to get a much better start than Southampton at home, fixture wise, I meant, before the kickoff. Bournemouth away is one of the grounds where you go and expect to get something, as opposed to Manchester City or Liverpool or Arsenal. So because you've got to go to those three places, you pick up points at places like this. If we are ambitious, and that ambition is on a solid foundation and not just sky high confetti in the wind, then we go to Bournemouth and win. And therefore, I'm taking us to go to Bournemouth and win, because I believe we're capable of doing that. Defeat is unthinkable. I mean, a draw right now, as I sit here, I would be disappointed, because I would think we're to win. But a defeat is unthinkable. But I believe we can go down there and win this game, providing we keep 11 on the park, of course. But yes,
Yeah,
I,
that
I
would
would I
definitely
would
help.
take it. That would help,
Um,
wouldn't it?
it would. My head says draw, but my heart says win. I think I think a few of the players will want to make up for, I mean, lost time. Lost is not the phrase really, but will want to show what they can do when they've got a full 11 out. Like I said, Jacob Murphy will want to restake his claim, and you've got Anthony Gordon, who some people said looked a little bit off the pace. Okay, well, now he's got the minutes under his belt from the first game. He'll be wanting to show what he can do. So I think there'll be a few players just wanting to remind certain people of their ability. But it is a difficult place to go, and Newcastle's away record. It's interesting because it's a psychological thing. It was also down to injuries and depth and options that Eddie Howe simply didn't have. Now he's got them. That's another reason why they need to win it, really, I guess, because then you've got no excuses. Let's say a win, John. Let's go with the good old heart rather than the head, and we'll see where we are next
I
week.
mean,
Hopefully, Newcastle United can have 6 points out of 6.
yeah, you've got to go with the win, because if you boil it down and make life very simple, do we want or expect to finish top four? And that's been bandied about. If we do, we'll win at Bournemouth. If we don't win at Bournemouth, we finish seventh or eighth. Uh, if we replicate that through the whole season. So, if we are going to live up to our own hype, we go to Bournemouth and win.
Well, fingers crossed they do get the victory. This has been the match preview with me, Andrew Musgrove, and John Gibson. Please give the video a thumbs up on YouTube. Please leave us a rating and review on the audio platform. It really just helps get the show to a wider audience and allows us to do this for free. Head over to chroniclelive.co.uk for all the latest Newcastle United news, including a dedicated transfer live blog and Eddie Howe's press conference as well on Friday morning. It's a pleasure, as always. And for myself and John, we'll see you guys very soon.